Welcome to Grants Trail. Trail opens 30 minutes before sunrise and closes 30 minutes after sunset. No high-speed bicycling or rollerblading. Only authorized vehicles allowed. All pets must be kept on a leash no longer than 6 foot. Please clean up after your pet. When passing, announce your presence and pass on the left.
Time here as a farmer, it's a real struggle. He is raising mostly fruit and vegetable crops like corn.
You're running a 333.
People come to Grants Trail for a myriad of reasons. To walk, bike, or in my case, to run. When I was a kid, my mom would take me and my sister here while she trained for marathons, and she would have us ride our bikes beside her.
Well, I didn't want to pay for a babysitter. And I wanted to extend my love of running and exercise to my kids and get them motivated to be active themselves. I would put you both in the jogger. We'd go out for runs together. So you'd usually fall asleep, but but I think it worked. I think both my kids are active.
After a while, I began running myself, training for my first half marathon here with my mom, getting my long runs in on the flat, straight asphalt. Besides my mom, Grants Trail is what really ignited the spark inside me that has always been a place for me to turn to. I'm not alone though. Grants Trail connects 7 municipalities, many parks, historic sites, libraries, schools, and people together. In the extremely car-centric city of St. Louis, it can be difficult for most people to be able to enjoy the outdoors. But here, people from all walks of life can come to enjoy a quiet slice of nature void of traffic. Grants Trail is more than just a trail and is a keystone of the community. It wasn't always 2 lanes of asphalt though. And to appreciate the true significance of Grants Trail, we must look back to the time of Grant himself.
I spoke with Nick Sacco, a historian at the Ulysses S. Grant National Historic Site, to learn more about the land's deep history.
So I'm Nick Sacco, and I am the historian and museum curator at Ulysses S. Grant National Historic Site. So we're located in South St. Louis County, and we are a unit of the National Park Service. The park itself was established in 1989, but for me personally, I've been full-time here at the historic site for about 9 years. I started in 2014, and for most of that time, I've worked in interpretation and in education. So, working with school groups, designing education programs, giving tours of the historic Whitehaven estate that we manage here. But about 6 months ago, I took on this new role as the historian and museum curator. So, kind of doing more stuff behind the scenes, doing historical research, caring for the museum's collections, kind of being the resident historian expert here at the park. The house itself, the historic Whitehaven estate, there was a gentleman from Virginia named William Lindsay Long who began construction on the Whitehaven estate between 1812 and 1816. So a little over 200 years that the house has been on this property here. And Julia Dent Grant, Ulysses S. Grant's wife, her family, the Dents, they acquire Whitehaven in 1820, and that kind of starts off this long extended relationship of the Dent and Grant families to the Whitehaven estates.
A young Ulysses first came to this land in 1844 after graduating from West Point, and he was stationed at Jefferson Barracks. He was only a few miles away from a property called Whitehaven, owned by the Dents. He began courting the sister of his roommate named Julia on this property, and they eventually married in 1848. After serving in the Army for some time, Grant returned to Whitehaven in 1854 to farm.
What was life like on the Dent farm? Like before Grant and while he was here?
Sure. Great question. So, this property being owned by Julia's father, Frederick Dent, Frederick Dent gave himself the nickname of Colonel, kind of wanting this to be sort of a southern plantation. He adopts the name of Colonel, and he eventually, the property amasses enough property that Whitehaven becomes about 850 acres. So on a daily basis, the Dent family is out here on this land, and Frederick Dent himself was a very successful merchant, businessman, so he was fairly wealthy, so there would have been lavish meals in the house. Many of St. Louis's most prominent residents would come out here. So, for example, William Clark of Lewis and Clark fame was friends with the Dents, and he came out to Whitehaven and would have meals out here on the property. So for the Dent family, this is a really high quality standard of life. Things were great for them here, and there were upwards of 30 enslaved African Americans who were working on this property, and the Dent family claimed ownership of them. Now, that number fluctuates, but the enslaved laborers are central to the operation here. The evidence points to enslaved laborers constructing the original Whitehaven estate. The enslaved people would have cared for the farm animals, would have grown crops on the lands here, would have been cooking and cleaning inside the main home. And in Julia's retelling of the story, she paints this really happy picture of her childhood here. But you can imagine for the enslaved people, these are long, hard hours that they're working on a daily basis, not earning wages for the work that they're doing here. And while we don't have a great deal of documentation from the perspective of the enslaved, I do think it's noteworthy that during the Civil War, the enslaved people did run away from Whitehaven. So even though Julia thought that they were being treated like family, the enslaved may have had a different opinion on what life was like here. Whitehaven, sure.
Yeah.
Grant came to own the property and allow the Missouri Pacific Railroad to build the Kirkwood-Carondelet line through his property, which was a spur on the main line to alleviate congestion in Kirkwood. It was constructed in 1872, and in exchange for Grant allowing them to go through his property, Missouri Pacific built a train station at Whitehaven. Grant used the line at least 4 times to get to his Whitehaven property. The rails follow Gravois Creek. Gravois is French for gravel, which cuts through the surrounding hills and offers a perfect spot for the railroad to be built.
As Grant is trying to get this farm operation up and running again as President of the United States, what's happening is that there is a population growth in this part of St. Louis County. And as more people are moving out here, and as the railroads are starting to expand really across the country in the 1860s and 1870s, there was a railroad company, the Missouri Pacific Railroad, that they approached President Grant. And they said, hey, we want to put a line through South St. Louis County that would eventually wind its way into Illinois. We want to kind of develop sort of this trade network going into Illinois. And they said, we would love to put this line through your property if that's okay with you. And Grant, in his mind, this is a win-win for him.
The line was exclusively for freight. However, throughout the 20th century, there was less and less usage of the rails, so by 1990, Missouri Pacific ended service along the spur. The trails, unused, became abandoned and overgrown. A year later, under the Rails to Trails Act, a company called TrailNet purchased 6.2 miles of the railroad and began replacing it with trail. It wasn't until 1997 that the first 4 miles of trail were completed after several setbacks. By 2000, TrailNet and other advocates successfully pushed for a ballot initiative creating a sales tax to finance the construction of greenway trails in St. Louis City, St. Louis County, and St. Charles County. This became Great Rivers Greenway, a public agency tasked with the planning and execution of a network of greenways connecting the region. By 2006, Great Rivers Greenway completed the 2-mile extension to Kirkwood, making Grants Trail 8 miles long. More add-on projects were completed by 2020 to make Grants Trail 10 miles long and stretching all the way to the River de Pere. Today, plans are still being drawn for Grants Trail's development. There have been talks of extending the Kirkwood Trailhead to downtown Kirkwood and plans to connect the other end to Forest Park. These projects would connect the trail to some of the most important landmarks in St. Louis. So do you remember your first time that you ran the Grants Trail? So in 1998, you said you were...
Yeah, not necessarily the first time, but I remember going out for my first long run, for my first training for my first marathon, and I looked at my run map. I map my run, I think is what the app called, and actually discovered Grants Trail was very, very close to me. So I mapped out a way to get to Grants Trail from my home, and it was a 2-mile run to Grants Trail, and then from there I could go either way towards Kirkwood or towards Lee May Ferry area, down to when I was running it ended at Orlando Gardens, so the trail extension hadn't happened yet. So I loved it because it was close to my home, but also because it was flat and I had to go a long distance. So when I got there, I was like, oh yeah, this is great. This is going to be my run.
So what makes Grants Trail so significant? One important aspect is preservation of the history and the artifacts of a different time period, but also the preservation of nature and the ability for nearby residents to experience the land for what it once was.
Well, why do you think preserving history is so important?
Well, I think it's one thing to read about history and to, sort of be within that academic setting and talking about history, but it's another thing to actually see it with your own 2 eyes. Preserving history and preserving sort of the tangible artifacts of history, the material culture of history, it holds its own significance and power that inspires people to want to learn more about the past. The railroad, it's a connector. It connects this part of St. Louis County to downtown St. Louis and to Illinois, and there's a story to be told about sort of the growth of railroads and transportation infrastructure. But the railroads kind of play a little role in telling that story of just how significant St. Louis was to really the entire country. And so I think it's just cool how it's not just a trail. There's a historic quality behind it too, and so it is to a certain extent a form of preservation by keeping the trail in place so that people can benefit from it and learn a little bit more about the history of St. Louis.
I think it's a great trail for the community. That's another thing I do like to the Grants Trail, because it could take you to many places. You could get to River de Pere, you could get to Jefferson Barracks, it's like all these little, like Clydesdale Park. I always, went to Grants Trail and then went up into Clydesdale Park. So it's not this monotonous flat trail. There's always these other areas you could explore and discover as well. It's just a great trail for bikers, runners, walkers. It's just a great community trail for St. Louis.
On top of that, I think there's something to be said about things like Grants Trail that help people sort of make those connections between history and today, and even history with nature. Being able to do health and wellness activities, to enjoy, a wonderful day outside, and to learn about history along the way.
For me, I'll continue to run this trail as long as I can. It doesn't matter to me if I need to run 20 degrees on inches of snow or ice, come home drenched from rain after a run, or collapse after a 12-miler in the humid July heat. I will always find something to enjoy here. Just giving a brief nod to a fellow Grants trailer, seeing the Budweiser Clydesdales, or just cruising under a canopy of trees, it brings me back time and time again. Grants Trail is more than just a trail. It is a history, a training ground, a connector, a meeting spot, a refuge, a little slice of what once was, and a testament of goodness and beauty today.